Good evening, and welcome to tonight's Meriden Historical Society program, The Faces of Hubbard Park, with Justin Piccirillo. Before we begin the program, a few pieces of information. All attendees joining us on Zoom are on mute, and we ask that you please keep your microphones and cameras off to ensure an uninterrupted presentation. To turn your camera off, click the Stop Video button in the left corner of your screen. After tonight's presentation, we will have a live question and answer session. Please submit your questions in the chat throughout the program. You will find the chat icon in the Zoom toolbar on the bottom of your screen. For those watching on Facebook, you can submit questions too. Leave your questions in the comments section of the live stream. We will do our best to ask as many of your questions as possible. And now, to get us started this evening, it is my honor to introduce Sherwin Borsek, President of the Meriden Historical Society.
Okay, welcome to the next in our series of programs about Meriden, brought to you by the Meriden Historical Society. Our speaker for tonight's program, entitled The Faces of Hubbard Park, will be Justin Piccirillo. But before we begin, I'd like to make a few announcements. Live the story of Walter Hubbard's gift of Hubbard Park. A walk through the park with Justin Piccirillo is scheduled to take place at Hubbard Park on Saturday, June 12th, 2021. We'll meet at the bandshell, in the bandshell at 10 a.m. The rain date will be Sunday, June 13th, 2021 at 10 a.m. Following the tour, Justin's newly published book, Hubbard Park, will be available at the Society's Museum, the Moses Andrews Homestead at 424 West Main Street. The museum will be open until 3 o'clock. I'd like to call your attention to the current exhibit at the Andrews Homestead, Vice in Meriden, Smoking, Drinking, Gambling, Meriden's Products for Bad Habits. The exhibit is open every Sunday in May from 11 to 4, as well as Saturday, June 12th, after the Hubbard Park Walk, or Sunday, the 13th, should that be the rain date. I'd like to remind you that the Society is a 501c3 not-for-profit, and we depend to a great extent on contributions to pay our expenses. Should you choose to contribute, you'll find a link in the chat or your confirmation email from earlier today to contribute, or on your Facebook screen or our website, meridenhistoricalsociety.org. I'd like to introduce Justin Piccirillo, board member of the Historical Society and now newly published author of his excellent book, Hubbard Park, available on Amazon or at your favorite bookstore. Justin.
Thank you so much, Sherwin. Hello, everybody from near and afar. Hello, welcome, welcome aboard. Thank you so very much for allowing me to come out and do this again. Before we begin, though, you know what? I really just want to personally thank you all who've supported the book in some way. You know, I'm both humbled, grateful. I really hope it's a book that brings joy to each of you guys. It was really quite an experience. I mean, just such a wonderful thing. So with that being said, let's get on with the presentation. Here we go. Let's see, let's go right over here. Share the screen. We gotta share the screen, Brian. Minor difficulty here. Share the screen. Here we go, folks. Here we go. All right, here we go. The Faces of Hubbard Park, and let's present. All right, folks, here we go. So the Faces of Hubbard Park. So what I did was, you know, this list could be open to so many more people than the 25 I had picked here. You know, assistant superintendents, workers, the list can go on and on and on. But these are the ones that I picked as kind of the game changers to the park. And so what you're looking at right here, you're going to see some of these people again throughout this video. So this is, if you are at Spruce and West Main, and you're at the corner of that, looking into the park. So this is Notch Road. So if you can kind of see over here, this would be where the bandshell is. Over here would be where the original playground would have been. All right, so this is the road that would go back to the castle. A couple things really to really take a look at is originally there was a dovecote where there were pigeons, and more so there were a couple houses right here, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So the people you're looking at in this picture is Bessie Hubbard. So this is Walter's niece and adopted daughter. Her father died, Walter's brother died, and he adopted his daughter, his niece. And this is Patrick Quigley, known as PJ Quigley. He was the first superintendent of the parks. This gentleman is Robert Morrissey. We are presuming, although there was no label to it, the face is quite recognizable as Robert Morrissey. And I believe this gentleman right here is Paul Tambryn. I would love to know definitely. I've done a little research on this guy. I can't find out 100% if the name Tambryn or Tambourine sounds familiar. We had a very, very famous children's book illustrator named Jean Tambryn Bertoli, and this would have been her grandfather. So for tonight, I'm going to try and make it somewhat quick, but you know me, I can talk and talk and talk. So we'll start off with the presentation. We'll do the question and answer, and then finally we will close. So let's go. Obviously, the first guy to talk about is Walter, Meriden's greatest benefactor. So Walter was born in Middletown. A lot of people don't really realize that he was not a Meriden native. He was born in Middletown in 1828. So we're talking the early part of the 19th century, September 23rd. So he came to Meriden in 1851, set up a dry goods store. He made some money. He got married to a woman named Abby Bradley. Abby Bradley only lived to be 19. A day before her 20th birthday, she passed away. And Abby was the sister to Walter Hubbard, who would soon to be Walter Hubbard's partner for many, many years, and that is Nathaniel Bradley and together they obviously did the Bradley and Hubbard company. It was a company that they put together in 1852. In 1854, a few other partners left. 1875, it becomes incorporated. So there's a lot about Walter Hubbard's life before this park that really makes, you can see his interest in Meriden. You can see his interest in several things. For example, in 1882, he created the Winthrop Hotel, which, as many of you guys may know, it was on Colony Street, next to the parking lot where we have today across from Gallery 53. Walter did die in 1911 in Burlington, Vermont. He was actually visiting his adopted niece and her husband, Dr. Pierce, who had a summer home up in Burlington, and he died there. All right, this is a very rare picture. Walter is sitting in his carriage. Here's the Bradley and Hubbard Manufacturing Company employees, and they were at an outing at the Meriden Trotting Park, which was off of Kensington Avenue. And this is about 1891, 1892. This is probably the question I probably get the most. Where did he get the idea for the castle? Where did he get the idea for the dovecote and the pavilion and the beehive? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some pictures here, and then I'm going to take you on the trip around the world, I guess. So on July 30th, 1883, Walter Hubbard left Meriden with his nephew, Clarence Bradley, who we know, the Bradley home, who gave the money to the Bradley home, on the train around the world. This is his path. So here he is. We start off in Meriden. He goes across the country. He ends in San Francisco. He gets on a boat and he goes to China. So now he's over here. All right. He is captivated by the culture, the goods. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the Bradley home has one of the pieces that he brought back from China. I could be mistaken there, but I remember Molly and I were talking about that, and I believe there might be a piece there. Then he went over to Europe. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, and this is where we see a lot of the stuff that's in Hubbard Park today. The beehive motif, all right, it was a symbol for nature, and it was used throughout Europe, all throughout the 19th century. So we have that beehive, and you can see he used it. And there's still some beehives. We have the main beehive, which is on the trail, But if you look at the children's playground, the original children's playground, you can see little beehive motifs that are still there today. In France, he saw a dovecote. He fell in love with this idea of a dovecote, which basically is a pigeon house. So this is kind of neat. I just found this out an hour ago. How to say, I always called this Craig Aleshi, but it's not, it's Craig Ella Key. I'm learning this as we go too. All right. When he was there, he saw these four towers that actually embraced this bridge that went into this village in Scotland. And he fell in love with this tower. And eventually this tower became, as we know, Castle Craig. And then lastly, when he was in Italy, he fell in love with the classical architecture. And we can see that in the original Hubbard Park Grecian temple, which we all call the pavilion, which is behind the band shell. All right, just a couple things that Hubbard did that really spawned the park and really developed the park. Cliff Drive, if you know Cliff Drive, it's basically if you get to the reservoir and you go through up to the halfway house, which was originally called Fairview, and then it wraps around, it goes past the Beehive, and originally it would come down a separate way. As we know today, it goes over 691. We could talk about 691 later, but I don't want to talk about it right now. All right, Hubbard Park Day. This was one of the, I guess they call it a crowning event. That's the way the newspaper said it. I wouldn't necessarily call it a crowning event of the 3-day convention. Walter Hubbard, even though he wasn't top dog for the superintendents, they all looked up to him. And you can tell because certain times some of these gentlemen would come to the park and they would have some write-up in the newspaper, and they really just put Hubbard on a pedestal. But this event, they had all these gentlemen, they all came here, and they went over to the West Peak. They had some food over there, over at the Caitlin Cottage, over at William Catlin's house, which was on West Peak. And then they came over here and they posed here on East Peak, right next to the castle. All right, but you had all these top parks supervisors throughout New England, and they're all here celebrating Walter. And that is in 1904. You can see the date right there too, June in 1904. I debated about putting her in here, but there's so the recreation coordinator, Kathy Matula, stopped me one day and she says, Justin, she says, would there be a park if Abby Ann Bradley didn't die? And this is probably a tricky question to answer. How can you really put yourself in his shoes? And I don't think there would have been. So I am including her here for the simple fact that she was Hubbard's life. I mean, he never remarried. I mean, you can see, he had a chapel built for her and him, but he had the chapel built. I mean, he really, I mean, it's a love story. There's no doubt about it. I've said this a couple of times, Titanic makes you cry. Well, guess what? I think the Walter Hubbard story make you cry even more because, she died a day before her 20th birthday, and, he'd never remarried. He lived into his early 80s. I mean, he never, ever, in all the accounts, he's never with another woman for any reason. I mean, he really devoted his life to this woman. So I don't think he would have been, he would have put all his energy into a park, because in his latter years, everything was about the park. Yes, he did Brookside Park. Yes, he did Winthrop Square. He did a ton of little things, but the park was his pride and joy. And it was all his time. It went right to that park. This is probably the biggest secret to Hubbard Park that I can possibly tell you guys. Walter Hubbard never saw the park like you or I see it. There was a big gaping 5-acre hole that he never saw, he never got. He wanted, but he never ever got. All right. I included 2 pictures here to show you Mary Connerton's place. All right. Mary Connerton was a woman who owned these 2 houses. Now, again, if you remember in the very first slide, excuse me, you saw those the 3 gentlemen and Bessie Hubbard looking down this road. These 2 buildings right here was the Mary Connerton houses. Now, Mary Connerton, now there was a life to Hubbard Park well before Hubbard even got there. You know, there was, you know, the way to get to West Peak, people used these roads often. There was ice harvesting on the other side of Mirror Lake. So this was used by many, many, many people. Mary Connerton, she was given this house or sold this house from a James Connerton, perhaps her brother. I think it was her brother because they were very close in age. Could have been a cousin, I suppose. All right. Hubbard wanted this land. He never got it. He never got it. He pursued throughout the entire duration of his life after he started this. He never got it. Now, here's a very interesting, where did this, excuse me again, where is this property? So if you could imagine, this road right here is the road that goes behind the pavilion. So we're talking about a house that's right up close to the road today. All right, now watch this. We know the cannon, we know the flagpole. All right, the cannon would have been right here. The flagpole exists today. Now look at this. Over here, you can see a big hedge of trees that go way back here. All right, that was the division for Mary Connerton. So we know that would be where the band shell is today. All right, so that would have been Mary's property, all on the other side of that. Not many people know that little tidbit there, but I find that super interesting. All right, a gentleman named Merritt Martindale, who we'll talk about in a second, took over this house shortly thereafter. Oh, by the way, the park did absorb that house, and that was in 1921 after Connerton died. Charles Parker, what can you say? This guy's done it all. This guy absolutely did it all. You know, elected the first mayor, 1867. His company, the Charles Parker Company, was leading manufacturer of just about everything, including the shotgun. In June 1897, Parker donated 8 acres, which would later become the entrance to Hubbard Park. If you're coming up West Main Street, your first right, which goes up, that's called Parkway. Today it's called Hubbard Parkway, but then it was called Parkway. And that whole 8 acres right there in the front, right where you see the brook comes down, that was Charles Parker's. He donated to the city because he knew Hubbard was building this, and it was later used as the entranceway. All right. Oh boy, you know, being a school teacher, you know, every time I mention something about Hubbard Park, you know, of course, the first thing the kids say is always, "What about the black dog? What about the black dog?" Well, you know, I'm gonna say it's a legend. I'm gonna say it's folklore. A black dog, really? Did it really happen? You know what? It's so fictitious in every way, but. No, and this is why I say but. William Pinchon, I traced this guy. He was born in Plainfield in 1867. He died in 1910. I know that in New York. I traced his route coming to Meriden, and basically William Pinchon was such a straight shooter. There was nothing about this guy. He was an author. But he was an author that wrote nonfiction. I mean, there was nothing fictitious about this guy. You know, I followed him. I talked to the librarian in Oyster Bay, Long Island, where he's buried, where he lived after he moved out of Connecticut. And coincidentally, he moved out of Connecticut, and some people say he moved out of Connecticut because he knew about this black dog. Now, for those of you guys that don't know the story about the black dog, let me enlighten you. There's a fictitious dog. It's supposed to roam Hubbard Park. The first time you see this dog, now it doesn't bark. Or it barks, but you can't hear it. It doesn't leave tracks. The first time you see this dog, they say riches will come to you. So in the story, yeah, he got a check. He got some money. All right. The second time you get sick. Third time you die. Now, very tall tale-ish, very legendish, very folkish. But you know what? It's very hard for me to believe 100% that there's no truth and that he was just storytelling. It just does not, to me, I can't see it because everything about this guy really was true to life. Patrick Quigley. All right. So Patrick Quigley was a Civil War veteran. This was Hubbard's right-hand man. Now, was he his? He was his right-hand man for the park. I wouldn't really call him a confidant. I would call maybe his lawyer, who we'll talk about in a second, Henry King. We'll talk about him in a second. I would say he was really Hubbard's, confidant, his go-to. Quigley, on the other hand, though, was his go-to as far as the park is concerned. All right. Patrick Quigley was the foreman. Patrick Quigley was acquainted with Hubbard because Patrick Quigley was working with the Wilcox Silver Plate Company. And he was also a general contractor in the city. He became acquainted with Hubbard, and Hubbard said, hey, you know what? Would you like to work for me, help clean up this park? And that's exactly what he did. All right. And so as Patrick Quigley died in 1920, unfortunately, he had 2 children, and I don't believe there's any descendants after those children. I don't believe they had any kids. Josephine, his daughter that lived in Meriden, I believe died in 71. And I think she's buried, I believe, at Sacred Heart with him. Yeah. All right. Let's see. There should be one safe place in town where women and children may drive a horse and carriage in perfect safety. Superintendent Patrick Quigley, April 9th, 1907. As you can see in this picture, automobiles not allowed in the park. They were not allowed until 1927. They were allowed in the very, very beginning. In the very beginning, there's obviously in the picture of the book, in the front page, the cover of the book, you can see a gentleman who's driving one of the first cars in Meriden. But then it was disallowed, and not until 1927 was it actually reinstated. William S. Clark. William S. Clark was the surveyor of Hubbard Park. He took over for Pearson. You might have seen the Pearson maps. Pearson was the civil engineer and the surveyor of Meriden prior to William Clark. Quite honestly, there's a lot of talk about Olmsted, which we'll talk about in a second, helping design the park. But I got to be honest, if Olmsted's going to get a pat on the back, Clark is going to get a pat back on just as well, because it was Clark who was credited with laying out the entire Hubbard Park entrance, as you can see in the picture. How beautiful is that? Imagine that looking, just imagine pulling up West Main Street and looking at that, how beautiful that is. I mean, I got to be honest. The only thing that rivals that picture right there is today. Again, I'm going to talk about Chris Borden in a second, but Chris has made the park superb. And I'm going to show you a before and after that. I'm going to, all kudos to Chris Borden in a second, but William Clark with the layout of the Hubbard Park entrance. Hope I'm not boring you guys. I'm just rambling. I have a tendency to ramble. So ask my students, right, Bri? All right. So Henry King, Walter Hubbard's lawyer and confidant, astounding 64-year political career. I mean, the guy had done everything. I mean, anything from a judge to, what was he? A judge. He was the full-time mayor. I believe he served 3 terms. He was a 32-degree Mason. He also instituted the traffic tower, the traffic rules. The guy really did it all. So I have the picture of Town Hall. Obviously, he was the mayor. I have the traffic tower, but I also have Castle Craig here. And the reason why I have Castle Craig is because originally there were no stairs that went up. It was a big old ladder. It was Henry King, when he was mayor, that actually fitted it with the first staircase that we know somewhat today. I mean, it's been redone several times over the years, but the first real viable staircase was Henry King's. All right, and he supported that. All right. Merritt Martindale. Excuse me, let me grab a sip of water here. Merritt Martindale was the first caretaker to Hubbard Park. And the cool thing about Merritt is, quite honestly, he moved into the Connerton home, which I had mentioned to you earlier. But he was really the man invested the most in the animals. And Hubbard was given gifts left and right of animals, pigeons or fish, and it was Merritt that really took an interest to the animals And I mean, there's the particular story in the book where I mentioned, Hubbard was building up the goldfish pond, or the trout pool, and as they're building it up, they're adding lime into it, and Merritt's like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Hubbard's like, I already got there, okay, everything's gonna be great, everything's gonna be wonderful. The next time they come, a couple days later, they come to see the fish, and most of them are dead, and some of them are blind. So that is what led Hubbard to go get the goldfish that you guys probably remember, and I remember growing up. I don't know, stronger immune system maybe, I don't know, but it was goldfish after that. So originally trout, then goldfish. Boy, I talk a lot, don't I? I gotta hurry up. I only got like a few people left here. Let's go. Olmsted. So John Charles Olmsted, he was the nephew and adopted son of Frederick Law Olmsted, and this has probably been the controversy of all Hubbard Park lore. I mean, did Frederick Law Olmsted have a part in the design? I won't. Frederick Law, absolutely not. His nephew and adopted son, possibly a little bit. All right. There were a couple things that he did instill. He did recommend having rustic architecture throughout the entire park. He did recommend having a walkway around the entire Mirror Lake. And the other thing he actually did that Hubbard used was any fallen timber throughout the park would be used or utilized elsewhere throughout the park. And you see that with a lot of the bridges today, whether it be up on Cliff Drive, or whether you see it behind the pavilion. You can see some of these bridges, and there is some fallen timber repurposed. All right, David Stewart Douglas, 19-year-old draftsman for Bradley and Hubbard, who went on to design the three objects you see, the three structures you see there. Obviously, Castle Craig, the pavilion, and the skate house. It's funny, I call it the pavilion, we call it the pavilion, we call it the skate house, but again, the original names were the Hubbard Park Grecian Temple and the waiting station. So this is David Douglas. He lived he was born in Wallingford, came to Meriden, then he went to New York, and I think he felt a little I shouldn't say this. I don't really know, but I know he went to college to study draftsmanship a little bit more when he went to New York. When he was there, he was great. He came back, he moved to West Hartford, and he did a lot of buildings up in West Hartford. All right. And then, and all this is they actually interviewed his daughter. So I have some of those. So I learned a lot from these interviews with his daughter. Robert Morrissey was our second superintendent of parks. He followed Patrick Quigley. He came from England, and quite honestly, I mean, his thing was he loved flowers. I mean, he was a laborer in every sense of the word. I mean, he couldn't wait to plant. He couldn't wait to he was a builder. He was a laborer. I mean, he loved working, and that was very evident in a lot of the newspaper articles. Right. And he's the gentleman I believe we see in that first picture, the third one in. Mr. Kale. Mr. Kale, this story came to me from like 3-4 different people. And the first time I heard it, I'm like, I don't know about that. And then I heard it again, and then I heard it again, and then I heard it again. And, every time I heard it, I'm like, oh my God, this crazy story is really real. So it was told to me by his family. So, and I don't know if Kevin's listening right now, but I want to say a big thank you again to you and Maureen again, for helping me out with some of these pictures. So Thomas Kale, the cool story with this house. All right, we all know this house. We all know this house is the caretaker's house, but it wasn't always the caretaker's house. So next to this house is a big lot. All right. Was the original house on that lot? I believe it was. All right. It could have been set back a little bit more, maybe where the Parks and Rec buildings are. But here we have this house. So what happened was Thomas Kale, the gentleman you see in this picture, in 1905, He had his lamp, he had his kerosene lamp. Walking down the stairs, he falls. His whole house catches fire. It's done. The house is done. He reaches out to Hubbard. Hubbard says, I am not going to allow you to have any type of building materials come to this property. This is park property. At the time, that building was not park property. That road divided it. So he was public property, but the only way to get to that property was through the park. Well, Walter Hubbard said, absolutely not, absolutely not. Well, Suzio Construction, as we all know, was contacted by Cale, and he says, hey, what can I do? How can I get around Hubbard? Well, apparently they delivered, and this is the coolest thing in the world, they delivered all the materials needed for to build this house in the middle of the night. So the house went up very, very quickly. Hubbard, of course, Hubbard probably was jilted a little bit. And rumor has it that if you look at that front, now this is kind of cool. If you look at that front, it's a triple sized front porch. So rumor has it that Cale, because Hubbard was kind of, not meeting him halfway, rumor has it that possibly Cale was going to do a ice cream parlor here. All right. This could make sense. This building has 3 entrances. So it very well could have, and this could have been a wonderful porch. You could have your little ice cream, and this would, I don't know, unfortunately kind of go against what Hubbard and the commercialism in the park. But I don't know. You know what? I don't want to say nothing of that was for 100%. But I will say that story has been told to me by 4 different people and 4 really separate people. So I've heard that, and that's super cool about that house. I gotta zoom it up a little quick. I could talk and talk and talk. All right. Frederick Kilbourne. All right, Frederick Kilbourne. Basically, he's the one who devised these footpaths. Of course, there were trails previous to him, but it was he that actually marked them out, documenting each. And a Renaissance man in every sense of the word. I mean, he worked at the Curtis Library. And then he's credited for being an associate editor of the Webster's Dictionary. I mean, really, and I think he was born in Cheshire, but I know he lived here in Meriden. And I mean, look at this. I mean, the editor of the dictionary. And in his spare time, he just happens to blaze trails throughout, central Connecticut. He's also known for the documentary, the book on the White Mountains. He also wrote that, and that is still considered the Bible to the White Mountains. So he really was legendary. I mean, there's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Frank St. George, very little is known other than the newspaper articles. I'm going to keep him kind of short because I don't know. There was no pictures I found. He is buried at Sacred Heart. I did see that, but he was very active in politics, and this is like Hubbard. This is kind of interesting. Like Hubbard, there's very little on Hubbard that's written down. You would think someone of that stature, there would be mounds and mounds of stuff on him, and there's not. St. George, the same thing. I mean, I read some of his credentials. You would think there'd be more on this guy. Unfortunately, there is not. But he was there during the redevelopment. If you remember earlier, I said that there were no automobiles. They weren't reinstated until 1927. It was under Frank St. George, who was the superintendent after Morrissey. So it was under Morrissey. He came after Morrissey, and then it was under him that there was this big, I'm not going to say Renaissance, because I think the 50s really was the Renaissance to the park. But it was maybe a first Renaissance, I guess, a redevelopment throughout the park. Pasquale Yaya. This guy, I got to tell you a funny story about this guy. All right, so Pasquale Yaya was, he was the superintendent. When I interviewed Mr. Berry's son, James Berry Jr., he kept talking about this guy Yaya. So of course, naturally, YA. I'm looking under YA. I could not find anything on this guy Yaya. And in my mind, I'm thinking, all right, what am I doing wrong? And then finally, I'm like, there's got to be another spelling here. And so as soon as that popped up, boom, all this stuff came up. So I would say Yaya's biggest claim, I mean, the park was pretty self-sufficient then. I mean, he worked, he labored throughout the park, but his two students, if you will, was Donald Robinson and James Barry. And I think to teach both of these two, absolutely unbelievable. He mentored both of them, and they both went on to some great things. All right. Donald Robinson, unfortunately, if you are driving up West Main Street, before you get to the skate house, you will see this along the roadside. That is a little memorial for him. Robinson was a superintendent after Yaya, and unfortunately he was called into war in 1940, and Donald unfortunately was killed. So subsequently Barry took over, but it was very, 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 very sad, because obviously it's sad, nonetheless, but it was sad because the park was actually it was you could see the growth coming. You can see it. Robinson was very interested in forestry. He had a degree in forestry, I believe, from UConn. In fact, his father, Donald Robinson's father, had a construction company, an asphalt pavement company called Robinson and Powers, and they are the first company to actually pave the road up to the peaks, and that's how he got involved with the park, because hey, his dad knew some people. But any which way, Robinson unfortunately was killed, and that monument, I'm sure you've got everyone in this chat. I'm sure you've seen that. Mr. Barry, as I'm going to say this, over and over and over again, no person other than Walter Hubbard himself influenced the park in a greater way than James J. Barry, and I cannot stress this. I mean, he was the park. There are many people. Everyone that's been associated with the park has definitely had their part in designing and the evolution of this park. But I have to say, James J. Barry with the daffodils, just overall, I mean, just making it a very, very, very wonderful place to be. I mean, I wish I was around in the 50s to have gone through this, before the stickers went into the cars. And I'm sure some of you guys might remember, in 1959 and actually it's January 1960 when they actually had stickers that when you would come into the park, because there were people, out of towners, that were coming into the park, at the crack of dawn. I mean, and here Meridenites weren't able to get into the park, so they instilled this sticker. And Dean, if you're listening right now, thank you very much, because Dean helped me out big time with a sticker, and I'm going to be 100% grateful to you forever for finding me that sticker. But any which way, James J. Barry, one of the best. Fred Mandeville. Now, Fred was kind of cool. I met him when I was a kid. I just knew him because he was friends with my dad. But the cool thing about Fred is that he worked alongside Barry early on in the early 50s, and then he was beside him, and then a decade later he gets called on, and then he's later named the city's recreation director. So it seems like he's here, and then he's here, and then he's here. So he's always been kind of like this guy that in and out, in and out, in and out. He retired in 1980. And then he was, by the way, he held the post till 1967, and then he was appointed director. All right. We're going to see him again one more time, I believe, in this. All right. Ken Horrigan, a man of many talents. I have to say, if there was, if any of you guys follow baseball, Mr. Cofran, I know you're out there somewhere. George Cofran, I know you're out there. You follow baseball. Here you go. All right. Last night, the Yankees, they hit their, the 11th or 12th no hitter last night. If you know baseball, there's something called utility player, who pretty much can go anywhere, anyhow, do any job, anytime. Folks, introduce yourself to Ken Horrigan, Hubbard Park's utility player. Like I said, I mean, he did it all. And I wish I knew him. You know, I've interviewed Chris Borden, I've interviewed Zubor, you know, and every one of them has so many high things to say about Horrigan. But unfortunately, he didn't have the, from what I see and from what I read, he didn't have the, he was such a good utility player that he never really, how can I say it? I mean, he was a helper. He did what was needed, and he didn't want the credit. You know, whereas some of these other guys that I mentioned, you know, the credit always went to them. The credit always went to them. In Horrigan's case, it looks like he didn't want any kind of credit. He just wants what's best for the park. And so, in that regard, I mean, he really was everything, all rolled up in one person. I mean, that's what I see. White Earp, you know, Craig. So as the 70s loomed on in the park, and there were some issues, there were some things going on. You know, there was a lot of vandalism. There was just a lot of misuse. I think that's the best way to say it. So Meriden called on Craig Schroeder, and Craig Schroeder, although he wasn't a Meridenite, he fit in real quick, and he was perfect, the right man for the right job at the right time. I call him White Earp. I call him the White Earp of Hubbard Park, and the reason, because he cleaned it up, and he was not alone. I will, you know, we're going to see in 1 second, he was definitely not alone. But I will say that I said this to Chris Borden a while back, and I says, you know what, in the whole evolution and development of the park, it just so happens that the right person came at the right time. You know what? Craig came at the right time. You know, the park needed him. They needed his personality. They needed his, you know, gusto to, you know, to get this park back together after a decade of misuse. And I think Craig was one of I'm not gonna say the best things, even though I do think he did everything that he should have done. But I think at the time, him with a couple other components made the park great again. I will say that. I will totally say that. So Schroeder's credit for cleaning up Hubbard Park after a decade of misuse. And here's Mark Zubor. Mark Zubor is noted as being part of the original Daffodil Festival Committee, as well as initiating the park's annual Christmas in the Park Festival Lights. Folks, I got to tell you this right now. Mark really, really changed everything. He was such a game changer in every part of this park. I can't begin to tell you how in so many ways. I mean, he brought it from, well, and thanks to Craig and Ranger Ron, which we're going to talk about in a second. I think Zubor, you know, by instituting these new celebrations, he brought people to the park, and that's exactly what we needed. I think there's no other way around it. I mean, Mark, you know, here, I'll show you the next slide. All right, as you can see, obviously the Daffodil Festival, the Festival of Silver Lights, and you can see, I mean, he's part of that committee that put Meriden on the map. I mean, the Daffodil Festival, think about that. I mean, it went from a city thing to a regional thing to, you know, almost overnight. I mean, within a couple of years, it was the hallmark of celebrations. Silver Lights. I mean, look at this. I mean, I think I was told this. I think they said that this was the biggest year for the Silver Lights. I mean, 350,000 lights. I mean, what an amazing accomplishment. Meriden, and this is all of us, I think we all can pat ourselves on the back. What an amazing thing to have people from all over New England, all over the United States to come over to see the world, even. I don't know, but to come here and see these lights. Boy, I talk a lot. My gosh, don't you feel sorry for my students right now? Ranger Ron, I hope you're watching, buddy. Again, you know what? Craig changed Hubbard Park. He did not do it alone. Ranger Ron is in the house right here. All right. Meriden city officials definitely approved the 5-day-a-week patrol of Hubbard Park. Ranger Ronald Tremblay. Then a 16-year veteran of the Meriden Police Department assigned to protect the land. Now listen to this, assigned to protect the land, the buildings and the wildlife deter vandals, and to ensure the safety of park visitors. Folks, that's what it was like. Now, I remember it vaguely. I mean, I'm 46 now. Back then, I was probably, 10, 12 years old, going there. I remember the baseball field, playing baseball there as a kid, the picnics every Sunday or just about every Sunday with my parents. But, if there really were vandals to that degree, and thank God for people like Ron, and thank God for people like Craig, and, because they paved the way for Mark and Chris to have what we have today. I mean, there's no question about it. I'm not so sure the park would be the way it is today without Ron and without Craig. No way. No way. Chris Borden, what can I say? He makes this thing shine. I go to the park just about every day, even if it's just a casual drive-through, or if I'm there for 5 hours, having a little picnic. I'm telling you this right now, the park shines, sparkles, and it's because of Chris. There's no other way to look at it. And in knowing Chris, Chris takes every little part of that park to heart, and that's the way Chris is. You know what? He is, I just gave you 25, 24 different people right now. I'm going to tell you right now, in my mind, that guy right there that you're looking at, he is Hubbard Park. He makes that thing shine 120%. He is definitely, if there's a tree that's off, boom, he's on it. By the way, he's also our tree warden. By the way, he's also, I don't know if you know this, actually, I wrote this down. And Chris, I hope you don't mind. I'm saying this out loud because you have been, I know you have that certification, a certification that's unreal. I was reading this, and it's the elite group of parks at the mastery level. Kudos to you, man. I cannot say enough great things about what you have done to that park. All right, I talk a lot. I'm so sorry. And last but not least, Kathy Matula. All right, Kathy, I know you're out there. I had a conversation just before this presentation about these 25, and I want to end with a bang. And if you know Kathy, she has such a fire, creative spirit that you just don't see very often. And even though she's credited with being the recreation coordinator, she does so much more than that. Oh my God! If you ever want to go for a hike around Hubbard Park, she's got them going every week. She supervises a Veteran Day. She's working on a book about all the parks in Meriden, which I cannot wait for. In fact, she was telling me a little about it the other day. Imagine 25 parks all rolled up in one book. I cannot wait to see it. But, she's got degrees in recreational therapy and Parks and Rec administration. She started the yoga up on top of the castle. She's going to be doing a music series down at the band shell. She really is the recreation queen. Sorry, Ken, I had to say that, but you really are. You've really taken the park to another whole level as far as recreation. All right, through the years, the park has remained the best natural park in the country. Walter Hubbard. Folks, do me a favor. We're coming to a close right now. I need a drink. As you can tell, I talk a lot. But I want to do one real quick thing before I pass before we go into the question and answer. Do me a favor. Look at this picture. All right. So this picture is pre-1900. As you can see, there's no castle. All right. I am assuming it's 1898 because, as you can see, the pool right here is not built up yet. All right. So it was built up a little bit later. All right. You can kind of see what's going on. I don't know if you could see that one little dot of white right there. That's a rowboat. So this used to have boats in it. Now watch this. All right. You got to watch this. This is like the coolest thing in the world. I showed this to my wife. And she's like, oh my God, that's so cool. All right. Just don't tell her I said that because she gets so mad at me if she ever saw me. And forget that. Hold on. Watch this. Look at that. Look at that. That's today. Today, the park has never looked so beautiful. Thank you so very much, Meriden Parks and Recreation, Kathy, Chris. You guys make this what it is. All right. Now, I have to do a couple of shout outs. Special thank you, Meriden Historical Society. You guys always have my back, and I will always have yours. Parks and Rec, same thing. My God, you guys have helped me so much throughout the past couple of years. Brian, we're twins, buddy. Everyone says that. We are. Alan and Netta Weathers. That's that is Mr. Meriden. I don't know if you guys know Alan. Mr. Meriden. He's my go-to. David Emmett Cooley. He's a Meriden icon. And last but not least is my go-to for amazing photography. Definitely, if you know Lynn, please give her a pat on the back because she has helped me out tremendously, whether it was the book, whether it was this presentation. She's always on call with her amazing photography. So as you can see in the picture, Walter Hubbard is inscribed above the castle entrance. I talk a lot, I apologize. As Sherwin had mentioned earlier, we're going to be having a walk and talk. All right, so live the story of Walter Hubbard's gift. We're going to meet at the band shell on June 12th. I'm basically just going to walk a circle around, so behind the pavilion, talk about a couple things, talk about the original carriage ride. We're going to talk about we'll talk about the Man in the Stones. We'll talk about the Kale home again, wrap it around, talk about the castle, talk about Mirror Lake, and then bring it right back where Connerton's houses were, and then bring it back to the band shell. So it'd probably be about an hour, maybe hour and a half. If you are free and you want to join, please, by all means, please, please, please. And then afterward, we're going to have a little talk or book signing or whatever you care it to be at the homestead. All right. Boy, I talk a lot. I am so sorry. And with that, thanks for watching. All right. I am so sorry I talk so much. Hopefully you learned something.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Justin.
Hold up, right.
Get your screen going. So as always, that was an outstanding presentation. So informative. To everyone who's with us tonight, good evening. My name is Brian Cofrancesco. I'm on the board of the Meriden Historical Society. And tonight I'll be facilitating our question and answer session with Justin. I'm going to start with an overarching one. One of the big reasons why we wanted you to talk with us tonight is because of your new book, Hubbard Park, Images America, out in February by Arcadia Press. So make sure you get your copy if you haven't already. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what went into the research, what kind of research you did, what went into writing the book, pulling the pictures, presentation, kind of give everybody a sense of how this book came about.
Oh yeah, sure. So originally, as you know, so Brian and I, we worked together on a children's book, and we did a children's book about Hubbard Park. And basically I was reaching out to publishers and say, hey, I got this great book on Hubbard Park, and all these publishers are around the country, and who cares about Hubbard Park? I heard that a million times, right? And then this last guy saw the enthusiasm. I guess he saw, oh my God, you have such a passion for this park, you got to write it. And I'm like, I don't write, I draw pictures. And the funny thing is that that happened, and I thought about it for about a couple seconds, and I'm like, I could do this. I mean, this can't be too hard. It was pretty hard. I'm not gonna lie, but it was fun. And that I tell that to my students all the time. There's a time to work and there's a time to play, and if you can merge the two together, it's not work anymore. And that's what it became. It was almost like a quest rather than a to get involved in that park. And the thing is that I don't think, I'm surprised that there were never a book written previously about the park. I mean, Hubbard had two books. He put one out in 1900, he put one out in 1901. But they were really picture books. They weren't anything about the development or what came before it. And I'm surprised it never happened. So as far as the actual research, it's basically pulling up every single article in the newspaper for the last 123 years and interviews. And I try to interview as much as I possibly can, anybody. And even after the book came out, I couldn't wait to interview more people. But I think the interviews were definitely the most important part. And the cool thing is, when you interview all these people, you never, I'm not the kind of person to take everything at face value. I was the kind of person that, oh, there's a lead. and then you research that lead. Like the Cahill book, I heard it from Cahill's granddaughter, and then I heard it again, and then I heard it again from somebody else, and it's like, oh my God, I guess it really did happen. And it, almost all 4 of those stories were like right on the money. So that, I hope that answers your question.
It definitely does. It's interesting how much has gone into this whole process and to finally see the final product.
Yeah, Brian, I talk a lot. Did I say that already?
Well, we're going to try our best to get through all the questions tonight. I'm going to start, and hopefully some of these will be easy ones that you can rattle off. There were a lot of questions that came in about the people themselves.
Sure.
2 questions actually about Abby, his wife.
Yeah.
Does anyone know how or why she died? And the most recent one that came in was along those lines as well, about how old was he when his wife died?
He was 24, I believe. Yeah, I believe he was 4 years older than her. Again, you remember the diseases back then really don't kind of, they're a little off, a little different. I believe it was pneumonia that she died from. That's what I had heard. I can't verify 100% because I don't know. I mean, that was in 1853, 1852. But I believe it was pneumonia.
How about the Bradleys? Were any of them involved in the park itself, or was it just through marriage and through the Bradley and Hubbard Company?
That's a really good question, because Nathaniel Bradley and Clarence, well, I'll say Nathaniel really had fingers in other places throughout Meriden, the hospital. And, he also had a lot of land. And in fact, one of Hubbard's last things he was doing was Hemlock Grove, as you know, Columbus Avenue down at Hanover. And a lot of the land there, and Hubbard's thing was he wanted to make one tract of land, a route that went from Hemlock Grove down Co Avenue, up and over into the park. And a lot of the land from Hemlock Grove actually Nathaniel Bradley owned. And I don't know this for sure, and I'm really, really going on a limb saying this. So West Peak, as you know, there was a colony up there. And if you look at the original map of, so the map was drawn in 89, but one of the copies of it I have has all the writings of who actually, who owned some of the land plots up there. Nathaniel Bradley owned a lot of land up there. So was it just given to Hubbard? Possibly. You don't really hear much about Bradley with the actual park, but I think the closest thing from Bradley and that would have been, his lots up on top of West Peak. Good question.
So we had a question come in about the police officer that was assigned to Hubbard Park. How long did the city have one officer whose job it was to take care of the park?
I don't know that. Ron's on here somewhere. I believe he's probably listening in. The reason why I say I don't know 100% is because I know it was talked about prior to him being brought in. I know that was talked about. I believe, I think it was when I was talking to Craig. There was always this talk about, do we get this police officer? And so I don't know the exact, it's okay. If I don't know it, I'm going to tell you I don't know it. I don't know the exact thing because I know that there was a lot of talk prior to Ron being brought in. And that's evident in a lot of the newspaper articles too. There was a lot of talk about shouldn't we? There was a lot of, how to get out of this kind of like this pit, like I said, it really did fall in disarray, and, how to get out of this. And then, an idea of a cop being in the park, that, I'm sure that riled up a few people, but I'm sure it energized a few people too.
And we did get a comment that Ron was at the park for years, or either 4 years or for 4 years. That's from Ann Tremblay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's Ron's wife. Hi, Ann.
So we got a question when you were talking about Robeson and wondering, are there other monuments to people in the park besides that one?
Well, I don't think to the there's in 1959, I believe that Roy Wilcox felt that there was nothing to actually commemorate Hubbard in the park. And so Barry ended up getting the biggest, and I remember reading this, and it was the biggest boulder. Barry even said it that way, the biggest boulder he can find, brought into the park. And if you're near the skate house, you can actually see it. It's the big, there's a big monument there that says, this park was erected, blah, 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 by Walter Hubbard. So in that regard, that one, obviously it's called the Barry Bandshell, James J. Barry Bandshell. So I guess that would be a tribute to Barry. No, I don't, other than that, I don't think there's offhand that I know of.
All right, and then one of the last questions that has to do with the people is, of all the people you've talked about tonight, and I'm sure you're going to have a great answer for this, who is the one who you'd want to spend an hour talking with?
Oh, Hubbard. Oh, without question, Hubbard. Hubbard. I mean, there's, oh my God. It's funny, it's Hubbard. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I would love to sit down with any of them. I mean, and I've sat down with Chris, and I've sat down with Mark, and I've sat down with Barry's kid. But every one of them they all have something really special to talk about, and it's kind of interesting. Everyone has a different personality too. One will talk about the infrastructure, and one will talk about the trees, and one will talk about, and it's just like, you're going to learn from any of them, but without a doubt, Hubbard is everything. You know what? It's so funny. Hold on. Watch this. I got to show you this. So ready? So my son comes home one day, and Dad, guess what? I said, what? He's like, I got to do a project on someone from Connecticut. I said, oh yeah, what are you going to do? Like father, like son. He writes this whole big thing. Look at this. The castle. So he writes all about Walter Hubbard. Oh my God, I almost started crying. It was awesome. So yeah, answer your question, totally Hubbard.
You're breeding a little Meriden historian there. That's incredible. So we had a couple questions that came in about the waiting station or the skate house, and wondering if you
Sure.
could talk about that building and its history.
All right, so it was built in 1901. It's presumed to be built by Douglas, as I had mentioned earlier. That was mentioned by his daughter. So it was built basically, obviously, as trolleys, the streetcars were actually becoming popular. Hubbard did not like the idea of a woman waiting, standing up. So he wanted to find some place where they can sit down, sew, do whatever they're doing, do something. And then, so he created this place, and he knew that the kids would be waiting impatiently. So that's how he came up with the playground, which was right behind it. And so originally there were seats that kind of went around the base of it, right where the bathrooms are. But that's pretty much the extent of it. Obviously, it became a skate house later on. And today it houses a lot of the Christmas decorations. Who knows? Hopefully one day that will be a little bit more used. That'd be great. I remember, I don't know if anybody else, I'm sure everybody here remembers the hot chocolate. I do remember that. I was only, oh my God, I was about 3 or 4 years old, but I kind of remember it. I kind of remember going up there for a hot chocolate.
Well, while we're in that part of the park, someone asked about, was the area next to the waiting station called the children's playground because of the playscape that was there, or for something different?
Oh, it was always the playground, because the kids actually went into the wading pool. So, just below, the water there where Crow Hollow begins, comes off, and then you have the little pool right there. That was always utilized as a wading pool. And I think 18 inches, excuse me, I think the water there was always used as a wading pool, and kids would go into there. In fact, there's a lot of early pictures. I mean, it was crazy. All the kids and people that would really surround that pool. So yeah.
And how about they're calling it the rustic shacks that are on West Main Street and the park and by the lake. I think they're the little
The shelters?
the canoe shelter or whatever that one was of that.
Yeah. So the one that's on West Main and across from Eaton Avenue, that was the original Southington trolley stop. You know, there were a lot of issues with Southington bringing people in, and there were a lot of issues who gets the money. I think there was a big skirmish between Meriden and Southington, and so that was the original trolley exit, one of the car exits for Southington. And if you notice, right next to there's the two pillars, and so those two pillars would be the Southington way of coming in. And before Quigley, and I didn't talk about this guy, there was a guy named Miller, and he was a supervisor. He was the Southington. He was clearing from the Southington side into the park. I mean, he didn't last very long, but that was kind of his job. Was this supervisor Miller's job was to clean out the Southington side. And the other one was the original boathouse. And now I'm going to actually throw something out that, the big question is the commercialism in the park. There was things sold in the park, and this is like new to a lot of people. This is something I learned after the publishing of the book. When they had the dedication in 1900, they actually did rent out carriages. There was money that actually was there was money handed over if you wanted a carriage ride to the castle. I just found that out maybe about 6 months ago. So I say that because you asked me about that other shelter. The other shelter would have been boats. You can rent the boat there. Now, did he rent it? Did he lease it? I don't know. That there's no record of that I found. But that's where the boat would be. And that's why across the street, you can see there's like that little, that dip into the water. And there was also another dip into the water over by, like across where the Connerton's house would have been. Boy, I talk a lot, man. I talk a lot.
Well, we're going to try to get in a couple more questions. We had one that came in on Facebook. When I was a child, we had Sunday dishes and long handle spoons from my grandfather's ice cream shop. And I don't know if she is referencing in particular, but you mentioned across the street, and across the street, there was an ice cream shop for a little while, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Cat's ice cream shop before it went downtown. And it was on the corner. It's right where Wise Guys is today.
And someone was asking about the Beehive or the Beehives.
Sure.
Where is the one that's there today, and were there more at one time?
Oh, there were scattered throughout. I think at one time we actually had a map. I did it with a couple other people. We actually made a map of 6 of them. A couple were taken out there on 691. The only remaining one is still on Cliff Drive. Nothing but a trickle. And I got to warn anybody that goes up there, be careful, because sometimes that trickle on a really hot day, mosquitoes are out there, man, and they bite. Oh, baby, they bite. But again, like I was saying earlier, the motif of the beehive is evident throughout the park. At the base of the staircases at the old children's playground, you can see the beehive motif. And if you are coming down West Main Street, just before you take that kind of that bend right there, there was a beehive on the opposite side of the street, but that has since been taken out.
Well, and these are just all working perfectly. Someone asked if you can explain again where Cliff Drive is, and is that one of the trails? And could you really drive a carriage up one of the trails?
Yes. Yeah. So the reservoir, go up to the reservoir, you will see that there's the continuation of a trail that goes past the reservoir, and it will head up to the halfway house. That will continue going. It'll go past something called Boulder Bluff. So Boulder Bluff is basically these big, massive boulders that kind of line the path. And then you're going to go for a while. You're going to go up and down a little bit, and then you're eventually going to start really, really feeling the decline, and that's where the last remaining beehive is. And then you're going to cross over a little bridge, and again, that bridge has definitely been reworked, and it will continue downward. Unfortunately, though, it's a little different because 691 has come in, but the original Park Drive would have come right down through that.
And how about the wading pool area? So someone said swimming in the wading area pond near the goldfish pond was a big
Yep.
part of the 50s. When did the city stop the practice of wading in this area?
Oh, that's a great question. I would venture to say just prior to, I'd say right around just before that, I think. I don't know that 100%. That's a great question. To be honest with you, I have pictures of them in it in the 50s. I do have pictures of them, of people in it. Whether they were there or should have been there, I can't tell you that. I do believe there were periods of time, though, through the 30s, through the 50s, that they deemed it inappropriate, or they deemed it unclean, or they deemed it. So I think it was kind of like, there's no clean cut answer, because like I said, I've seen pictures of people in it in the 50s. I've seen people in the 30s, and there were times where it became like a just muck, I guess you can say. In fact, I'm sure you saw it too. There's that postcard. You ever see that postcard where what do they say on it? It's like, it's not muck, but they call it, oh, what is it? Do you remember?
I know.
I forget, but it's, Brian, you're muted. Oh, what was it? Remember? I forget. Scum, right? Pond scum. They call it pond scum on this postcard. I mean, really? I mean, here, hey, come and get this great postcard, Hubbard Park, pond scum. Really? Come on. I'm sure you're going to sell a lot of copies of that postcard, but I think that's part of it. Did I just say that? Did I just say that in front of what, 70 people?
I think you did.
Oh, I did. Okay.
Can you talk about where the cottages were up on West Peak and
Absolutely
up there today?
All right. So the cottages. So if you go towards West Peak, obviously the radio station towers are there today. So originally in 1889, the plan was that they were going to build a park, a hotel, and have this monorail going from West Main Street all the way up to West Peak. Hubbard fought it dearly. I mean, he fought it tooth and nail. He really fought this monorail going up there. But once word got that there may be a park there, and again, going back to the Johnson family, 1889, Henry Johnson had these plans drawn up, and it included this park hotel area. A lot of the affluent in Meriden quickly saw that, oh my God, this could be a booming thing. And they started buying land up there. And it was all subdivided, and William Catlin was the first one. There was Kasabian. I mean, there were a bunch of them, and they pretty much lined where the radio towers are, and right down the strip. I mean, Hubbard also got in on this, and he started buying land right up the bat. And quite possibly, your question earlier about Nathaniel Bradley, possibly Hubbard probably told him to buy up some land so they can actually stop this colony from getting any bigger, and preserving the wildlife and preserving just the water.
Well, and great segue. A question that came in about the water. Do you know anything about Echo Point near the end of Mirror Reservoir?
Well, yeah. I mean, so I learned this from my wife's aunt. She told me a story when she was a kid. They used to go to this one particular spot, and they would yell into the canyon. And I never heard it called Echo Point, but I have heard of the Mirror Echo. So I'm assuming it's kind of the same principle. And she was telling me they would go there, and they would just be entertained by their voice coming back to them from this canyon, from this little canyon, which I thought was kind of neat. And again, it's another one of those things where you hear the story once, and then you hear it again, and then you hear it again. It's like, oh, this must be what they, this was their entertainment.
And how about we're gonna wrap up with our last two questions.
Sure.
So do you still have any unanswered questions about Hubbard Park? I'm sure you have tons, but are there any that really stick out?
Wow, you got me. See, there's never a lull. I never stop talking, and I'm stopping. There's a lot. There's a ton about the park itself. You know what? And I don't want to end on a note like this, but I'm gonna end on a note like this because this is my biggest thing. Is I would like to know more about the inner workings of 691. Now I know a lot. I've read a lot about the paperwork. I got some of the state papers. I mean, I've read the newspaper. I've done all that. But if Hubbard was alive, that would never have happened. I would like to know a little bit more about the inner workings of 691. Dividing this park in half like that, the way it was, I don't know. You know what? I don't know. That bothers me to this day. And, I know, we were given the 46 acres back and, the appeals went through and all that stuff. But, to take that right through the park when they could have gone up, a couple miles up the street and done it somewhere else, I don't know. And the fact that it went through not Hubbard, but Brookside, City Park. I mean, the fact that it went through these other parks, I wish somebody put the kibosh on it. And I would like to know more about that. What else went on there?
And our last question,
Yeah.
to kind of pull it all together, if there's one thing, a fact, a piece of information, truth behind a myth, one of these 25 people that the attendees leave with tonight and remember, what would you want that to be?
Oh my God. That the park was an evolution. I mean, it was, yes, it was started by Walter Hubbard, but there would be no park without these 25. There would be no park without, you know what? These 25 are obviously, there's a lot of, pats on the back, and they did amazing things. But you know what? Me going there picking up some garbage. Peter Pollock is a great example. Peter, if you're here, man, a big kudos to you. Peter goes around. He's cleaned up that park to the nth degree. I mean, I don't think there really was a top 25 if you want to look at it like that. I want people to leave knowing that everybody has a piece of that park. If there's one thing I learned throughout this whole entire book and this whole entire process, it's that everybody has a story about the park. Good, bad, ugly, whatever. But you have a story about this park, and it's ours. It's not like it's it's fenced off and you can't get in. This is ours. I love Meriden. I mean, and I think it's pretty evident. I mean, I love this city more than you can imagine. I mean, I really think that we all play a part in its development, in its evolution. But these 25 that I mentioned, play a part in its evolution, but also its development. So if I have to say one thing, it's we all play a part in that park, and we should enjoy that park. And I think, the way it looks, the way it is, Chris and Kathy have really made that place, definitely the crown jewel of Meriden.
And that's a perfect place to leave it. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I could keep talking all night. No, really. Thank you again. I'm humbled by the reception of the book. Like I said, I drew pictures before I wrote this book. I had no intention of writing the book, and it feels, it was amazing. It was what a journey it was. So I want to just again thank you everybody that helped support it in any way. And also on June 12th, if you guys are not doing anything at 10 o'clock, please come down the park. I would love to meet you. A lot of people I meet on Facebook, but I never met you guys face to face. I would love to meet you guys now that the restrictions are opening up a little bit. I would love to really, really, really personally thank all of you guys individually, not through an email or an instant message or anything. I would love to just really just a heartfelt thank you for really making these past 2 years just unbelievable. And sorry about the I don't know, the wrong button I pushed before.
It's all good. Well, thank you so much, Justin, for sharing your research and for your knowledge and for being with us here tonight. It was great to have you for our virtual program. A reminder to everyone to please make sure you get your copy of Hubbard Park, for Images of America from Arcadia Press, on Amazon or from your local bookstore. Before we end, I'd like to take just a moment to tell you about our upcoming Historical Society programs. We have a lot in store in the next few weeks. So our biannual exhibits at the Andrews Homestead are back, and we invite you to come and join us on Sundays this month to view Vice, Meriden Items for Bad Habits. This free exhibit is open to the public every Sunday in May from 11 to 3, and will also be open on Saturday, June 12th for Connecticut Open House Day. Appropriate safety precautions will be enforced, including mask wearing and social distancing. And if you do not live locally, we have a great video tour with Sherwin Borsek available on our Facebook page and YouTube channel that will take you through the exhibit. And as you just heard from Justin, as you heard from Sherwin earlier, as part of Connecticut Open House Day, Justin will be leading a walking tour of Hubbard Park. We'll be meeting inside the bandshell at 10 o'clock a.m., also on Saturday, June 12th. And afterwards, we will have a book signing at the Andrews Homestead, and that'll be another opportunity to see Vice and Meriden. And also, as restrictions are lifting, our summer tag sales are back. The monthly tag sales at the Meriden Historical Society Research Center at 1090 Hanover Avenue will be the second Saturday of every month from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. You'll find collectibles, jewelry, household items, Meriden items, and more. And if you'd like to be a vendor at the tag sale, the cost is $10 for members and $15 for non-members. And though right now it seems a long way away, mark your calendars for October 2021 and our next exhibit, the 170th anniversary of the Meriden Fire Department. The exhibit will be presented in partnership with the Meriden Fire Department, and it will also be on Sundays, every Sunday in October. Our curators are looking for donations or loans of photographs or other memorabilia from the fire department and its history. So if you have something you'd like to share for the exhibit, please reach out to us at the Meriden Historical Society. And to learn more about the Meriden Historical Society and our work, you can visit meridenhistoricalsociety.org and like us on Facebook. You can also find more information about our upcoming programs in both locations, as well as the recording of tonight's program in the coming days. The Meriden Historical Society Research Center on Hanover Avenue is currently open by appointment only. And if you send us an email at meridenhistoricalsociety@gmail.com, we can coordinate a research visit. Masks are required of all researchers. To support the Meriden Historical Society and our mission, you can donate to the Society on our website and even purchase an annual membership, both via PayPal. Community support and membership are what enable us to steward the rich and diverse history of Meriden and its people. And I hope you'll consider making a donation if you enjoyed tonight's program. You can find a link in the chat. With that, we have concluded our program. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you again soon. Take care.